The sun had just begun to rise over the small town, casting a soft golden light across the streets. It was a quiet morning, with only a few cars passing by and the distant hum of early activity waking the town. A retired veteran drove slowly through the streets, his old pickup making a soft rumbling sound as it moved. He had always enjoyed mornings like this when the world seemed calm and the day was just beginning. Today he decided to stop at the local gas station, a small, familiar place he had visited countless times over the years. He was accompanied by his teenage son, who had recently taken an interest in learning about his father's life and experiences. The son admired his father deeply, not just for the stories of bravery and service he had shared, but for the quiet dignity and respect he carried in everyday life. As they pulled into the gas station, the veteran parked his truck by the pump and got out. The air was crisp, and the smell of gasoline mixed with the faint scent of morning coffee drifting from the small convenience store attached to the station. The veteran's son followed, carrying a small backpack and wearing a hoodie that was slightly too big for him. He looked around, taking in the familiar sights, the worn asphalt, the old signs flickering slightly in the morning light, and the cashier waving from inside the store. The veteran began to fill his tank, carefully handling the pump with the precision that came from years of habits and routines. His son stood nearby, watching, his hands tucked into the pockets of his hoodie. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even, but then a young man arrived at the pump next to them. He was loud, brash, and carried an air of arrogance that immediately made the veteran's son uneasy. The young man noticed the veteran's old military patch on his jacket, a symbol of his service that had faded over the years but still held immense meaning. Without hesitation, the young man made a remark loud enough for others to hear. It was mocking, disrespectful, and entirely unnecessary. The veteran remained calm, his hands steady on the pump, not reacting. He had faced far worse situations in his life, far beyond any words that could be thrown at him in a gas station. But his son could feel his father's discomfort, subtle as it was, and it stirred something deep inside him. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a need to defend the man who had sacrificed so much for the country. The man who had always been his hero. The young man continued, making another comment, this time more pointed, trying to provoke a reaction. He laughed, clearly expecting the veteran to respond, to get angry or embarrassed. The veteran stayed silent, focusing on the task at hand, but the son could no longer stand by. He stepped forward, his posture firm, his voice steady but full of conviction. He told the young man to stop, to show respect. His words were calm, respectful, but carried an unmistakable strength that made the young man pause. The moment was tense. The air seemed to thicken with the weight of the confrontation. A few people at the station turned to watch, sensing that something significant was happening. The veteran's son did not back down, standing squarely between his father and the aggressor. He spoke about respect, about honor, and about the sacrifices his father had made. He made it clear that no words of mockery could diminish the courage and dignity his father carried. The young man, caught off guard by the son's firmness and the sincerity in his voice, faltered. He glanced around, noticing the small crowd that had gathered, and the uncertainty in his eyes was evident. He had expected compliance or fear, not courage and conviction. After a brief pause, he muttered something under his breath and walked away, leaving the veteran and his son standing there. The tension slowly dissolved, replaced by a mixture of relief and pride. The father finally looked at his son, a small, proud smile touching his lips. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture of appreciation and acknowledgement. The son felt a rush of emotions, pride, relief, and a newfound understanding of what it meant to stand up for what was right. They finished filling the tank in quiet companionship, the incident lingering in their minds but also reinforcing the bond between them. As they walked toward the small convenience store to grab a coffee, the father tried to downplay what had happened. He spoke gently, insisting it was not a big deal, that he had seen much worse and that the world had always had people who lacked respect. But the son was not convinced. He had learned something important about courage and integrity, and he knew this moment would stay with him forever. Inside the store, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods filled the air. The cashier greeted them with a friendly nod, unaware of the brief drama that had unfolded outside. The father and son ordered their drinks, and as they waited, they reflected on the incident. The father began to share a few stories from his military days, tales of resilience, teamwork, and facing adversity. The son listened intently, connecting the lessons from those stories to the moment at the gas station. It was a subtle but powerful learning experience, one that blended the past with the present, teaching the son that courage was not only about battles fought on distant fields, but also about standing up for the people and values you love in everyday life. They sat at a small table by the window, sipping their coffee in companionable silence. The sun continued to rise, illuminating the town and casting long shadows across the streets. The son watched his father, feeling a deep sense of admiration and respect. He realized that heroism could be quiet, humble, and often unseen, but it was always there, carried in the way people lived and treated others. The veteran, meanwhile, felt a quiet pride in his son, knowing that the next generation was learning the lessons of honor, respect, and courage firsthand. The morning passed with a sense of calm restored, but the memory of the confrontation lingered. The son had stood up for his father, but more than that, he had discovered something profound about himself: the ability to act with integrity, to defend what is right, and to honor those who have sacrificed so much. The father knew that this moment would remain a cherished memory, a testament to the bond between them and the values they shared. As they left the gas station, the son felt a mixture of pride and humility. He understood that respect and courage were not about seeking recognition, but about doing what was right, even when it was difficult. The father smiled quietly, feeling that his son had taken an important step in understanding the true meaning of character. They drove away slowly, the town stretching out before them, carrying with them the quiet knowledge that a simple act of standing up for someone could have a lasting impact, shaping who they were and who they would become. The evening settled in quietly over the small town. The streets were calm, and the soft glow of streetlights reflected on the sidewalks. Inside their modest home, the veteran and his son were sitting at the kitchen table. The father had prepared a simple dinner, but neither of them was very hungry. The events at the gas station earlier that morning had left an impression that neither of them could easily shake. The father tried to act casual, clearing the plates and making small talk about mundane things, but the son was eager to discuss what had happened. He wanted to understand, to process the mixture of pride, fear, and responsibility that still lingered in his chest. The son began to speak, his voice careful but honest. He told his father how he had felt stepping in, the sudden rush of adrenaline and the nervous energy that made his heart pound. He admitted that he had been scared but knew he had to protect his father. The veteran listened, his eyes softening with understanding. He knew that this moment was more than just a confrontation. It was a lesson, one that his son would carry with him for the rest of his life. The father leaned back in his chair, letting the silence settle for a moment before he began to speak. He didn't lecture or scold. Instead, he shared his own feelings, describing the pride he felt for his son's courage and the calm satisfaction that comes from standing up for someone you care about. As the conversation unfolded, the veteran began to tell stories from his time in the military. These were not tales of glory or heroism meant to impress, but quiet reflections on moments that had shaped him. He spoke about long nights in the desert, the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, and the bonds he had formed with his fellow soldiers. He described the fear and the uncertainty, the moments when courage was not about doing something grand, but about holding steady and doing what was right, no matter how small it seemed. The son listened intently, absorbing each word, imagining the scenes vividly as his father spoke. He realized that courage was not just a concept in history books or movies. It was real, lived and breathed by people every day, sometimes in ways that went unnoticed. The father paused, taking a sip of water, and looked at his son with a quiet intensity. He explained that life would often present situations where standing up for what is right might not be easy. People might mock, ignore, or even challenge you, but the measure of a person is not in how they avoid conflict, but in how they respond when faced with it. The son nodded, feeling a deep resonance with these words. The gas station incident, while small in the grand scheme of life, had become a real-life example of these lessons. He understood now that courage was layered, built not only in moments of fear but also in moments of respect, empathy, and integrity. The conversation turned more personal. The father shared memories of his own childhood, growing up with values that emphasized respect, honor, and responsibility. He spoke about mentors who had guided him, the lessons he had learned from failures, and the importance of treating others with dignity, even when it was difficult. The son began to see a pattern, a thread connecting his father's past experiences with the life he had lived after returning home. He realized that the person standing beside him at the gas station that morning was the same man who had faced immense challenges and carried himself with quiet strength every day. The stories were no longer just tales, they were a guide, a window into understanding the moral compass that had shaped the man he admired most. Later, the father decided to take a short walk with his son around the neighborhood. The evening air was cool and gentle, carrying the faint scent of flowers and freshly cut grass. The streets were almost empty, allowing them to walk in silence for a few moments. The son asked questions, curious about the father's experiences in the military and how he had learned to stay calm in tense situations. The father replied thoughtfully, sharing insights about discipline, patience, and the importance of observing before reacting. He emphasized that courage was often quiet and understated, not loud or aggressive. The son began to connect these lessons to the incident at the gas station, recognizing that his own actions had reflected some of the values his father had instilled in him, without even realizing it. They stopped by a small park on the way back home, sitting on a bench and watching the dimming light of the sunset. The father spoke about honor and integrity, explaining that these were qualities that could not be measured by medals or recognition. He told his son that living by these principles required consistency, patience, and sometimes difficult choices. The son listened carefully, reflecting on how the small act of standing up for his father had felt right despite his nervousness. He understood that character was revealed in these everyday moments, in the choices that defined who a person truly was. As darkness settled, they walked home slowly, their conversation shifting to lighter topics. Yet the lessons of the day lingered, quietly weaving into the son's understanding of courage and respect. At home, the father encouraged his son to think about ways he could demonstrate integrity and bravery in his own life, not necessarily in dramatic or public ways, but in small acts of kindness, honesty, and standing up for others when needed. The son nodded, feeling inspired and motivated. He realized that these principles were not abstract. They were practical tools for navigating life, shaping his decisions and building the kind of character his father embodied. Before going to bed, the son reflected on the day's events in the quiet of his room. He thought about the moment at the gas station, the rush of fear and the steadying presence of his father. He realized that courage could manifest in many forms, sometimes loud and visible, other times quiet and unseen. The son felt a deep sense of connection to his father, recognizing that he had inherited not only the values but also the strength to act on them. He understood that standing up for what is right was not always easy, but it was always meaningful. The father, meanwhile, sat in his study, looking at a photo of his younger self in uniform. He thought about the journey that had brought him home, the lessons learned in distant lands, and the pride he felt in seeing his son embrace those same values. He knew that the morning's confrontation, though brief, had become a defining moment in his son's life. It was a testament to the bond between them, a quiet affirmation that the lessons of honor, respect, and courage were being passed on, generation to generation. As the night deepened, both father and son drifted into sleep, carrying with them the weight and warmth of the day's lessons. The events at the gas station had become more than a simple confrontation. They had become a bridge connecting past experiences with present understanding, shaping the son's perception of courage, integrity, and family. The bond between them, strengthened by shared reflection and honest conversation, was now deeper and more resilient. The son knew he would carry these lessons forward, in school, in friendships, and in the many small choices that life would present. The father rested with quiet satisfaction, confident that the values he had lived by were being honored and continued, not just in memory, but in the actions of the next generation. The next morning, the town was waking slowly, bathed in the soft light of a cool autumn sun. The veteran and his son went about their usual routine, the memory of yesterday's confrontation at the gas station still lingering in their minds. The father had insisted it wasn't a big deal, but the son could not shake the sense of responsibility and pride that had filled him. He remembered every detail, the look on the young man's face, the sound of his own voice standing firm, and the protective feeling that had surged through him. It was a moment that had already begun to shape how he saw himself and his father. While they went about their day, neither of them realized that the story of the son standing up for his father had quietly started to spread. One of the regulars at the gas station had shared the incident with a friend, mentioning the courage and respect shown by both father and son. That friend happened to know a retired four-star general who still lived in the area, and he relayed the story to him, emphasizing the son's bravery and the father's dignity. The general, who had dedicated his life to service and valued character above all else, was intrigued. In his years of experience, he had learned that acts of courage in everyday life often reflected the deepest strength of a person. He decided that this was a story he needed to witness himself. Meanwhile, the veteran and his son continued their day as usual. They stopped by the grocery store, went through errands, and even had a quiet lunch at a small diner near their home. The son kept thinking about what had happened and how proud he was of himself, but also how much he had learned from his father's example. He understood now that courage was more than just bold actions. It was the choice to do what was right even when it was uncomfortable. The father, as always, was calm, offering wisdom through quiet words rather than grand statements. He spoke gently about integrity, respect, and the way small actions could ripple out into something far greater than they appeared. That afternoon, while the veteran and his son were at the local park tossing a football, the general arrived at the gas station. He was in uniform, his presence commanding but approachable. He spoke with the station staff, asking questions about the incident, and listened carefully to their descriptions. His interest was not in scandal or drama, but in understanding the character of those involved. The staff spoke highly of both the father and son, emphasizing the respect and courage displayed. The general nodded, recognizing that these qualities, while not always visible, were exactly what defined true leadership and honor. Back at home, the son was doing homework while the father worked in his study on a personal project. The son's mind kept drifting back to the gas station and the feeling of standing up for his father. He began to reflect more deeply on what it meant to protect someone you care about, to do so with respect and not anger. The father noticed the thoughtful look on his son's face and decided to share more from his own life. He spoke about moments in the military when he had to act with calm determination, about making decisions that could affect others, and about the quiet satisfaction that came from doing the right thing without seeking recognition. The son listened closely, realizing that the lessons he had learned yesterday were part of a much larger tapestry of values and experience. As the day went on, the son and father prepared to return to the gas station for a quick coffee, unaware that something significant was about to happen. The general had decided he wanted to meet them in person, to commend both the father for his service and the son for his courage. The father was focused on helping his son with small chores, giving advice on schoolwork and life, while the son was excited but had no idea the story had reached someone of such importance. Their simple afternoon routine continued, carrying the weight of ordinary life, even as extraordinary events were quietly lining up for them. When they arrived at the gas station later that day, the place seemed normal at first glance. The familiar cashier greeted them warmly, and the father and son went to the counter to grab their coffee. But then the general approached them. His uniform was crisp and his presence was calm yet commanding. He introduced himself politely, shaking the veteran's hand and then turning to the son. The father was surprised, unsure of what was happening, while the son's eyes widened in astonishment. The general spoke with a warmth that was unexpected, praising the father for his years of service and the son for standing up for him with respect and courage. He described how such everyday acts of bravery reflected character in the most genuine way. The general shared his own story, explaining that during his career, he had witnessed many acts of heroism on battlefields and in leadership, but some of the most inspiring moments were those that happened quietly, outside the spotlight. The father and son listened, captivated, realizing that the general's interest was genuine and heartfelt. He spoke about the importance of passing on values of honor, respect, and integrity to the next generation, and how the son's actions were an example of these principles in motion. The father felt a mixture of pride and humility, while the son absorbed every word, understanding that his small act had significance far beyond what he had imagined. A small crowd began to gather around the station, drawn by the presence of the general. People were curious, watching the interaction with interest and admiration. The general remained focused on the father and son, explaining how courage is not always about public recognition, but about the quiet choices that define who a person truly is. He emphasized that standing up for someone you love, doing it respectfully, and acting with integrity were qualities that could change lives, inspire others, and build lasting legacies. As the conversation continued, the general invited the father and son to share their perspectives. The son spoke about his feelings, the rush of adrenaline, the fear, and the sense of responsibility he had felt. He described how he had realized the importance of respecting his father and defending him without aggression. The father added his reflections, emphasizing the value of calm, steady courage and the way small actions can ripple through communities. The exchange was heartfelt, human, and genuine, leaving everyone present with a deep appreciation for the values being discussed. Before leaving, the general requested a photograph with the father and son. The father, usually modest and reserved, agreed, feeling the weight of the moment. The son smiled, understanding that this memory would stay with him forever, a symbol of courage, respect, and the quiet impact one can have. The general shook their hands once more, offering encouragement and praise, then departed, leaving behind a sense of inspiration and gratitude. The father and son stood together, reflecting on the encounter and realizing how much a simple act of standing up for what was right had grown into something meaningful and memorable. As they left the gas station and walked toward their truck, the son felt a new confidence. He understood now that courage was not about seeking attention, but about acting with integrity. The father felt a quiet pride, knowing that the lessons he had lived by were being recognized and understood by the next generation. They drove home in companionable silence, carrying the warmth of the morning and the powerful reminder that respect, courage, and integrity mattered in both small and significant ways. The day had started like any other, but it had turned into a moment that would remain etched in their hearts, connecting them to a larger story of character, honor, and human kindness. The following morning was bright and clear, with a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. The veteran and his son had settled into their usual rhythm, unaware of the impact their small act of courage had begun to create beyond their own awareness. The son was eager to head out to the local park for a morning walk, carrying a sense of pride and reflection from the previous day's encounter with the general. The father, calm and steady as always, reminded his son that life was full of lessons, some quiet and some visible, and that every moment offered a chance to act with integrity. As they walked, they noticed a few familiar faces nodding politely in recognition. Though none knew the full story, the town was slowly becoming aware of the courage displayed at the gas station, though the details remained limited to whispers. Meanwhile, at the gas station, word had reached the general that the father and son often visited the station in the mornings. He decided to return, wanting to meet them again and speak more about the significance of their actions. He saw this as an opportunity to reinforce the values that both of them had demonstrated and to show appreciation in a way that could inspire others. When the veteran and his son arrived at the gas station for their morning coffee, they noticed a figure standing near the entrance, observing quietly. The general approached them with a calm, dignified presence that immediately commanded respect without fear or intimidation. He introduced himself again, shaking the father's hand with warmth and sincerity, and then turned to the son, offering a firm but friendly handshake. Both father and son were momentarily stunned by the general's continued attention and the weight of the moment. The general spoke with a clarity and depth that drew everyone nearby into the conversation. He praised the father for his years of service, emphasizing that true honor is not only found on the battlefield, but also in the quiet strength a person carries throughout their life. Then he turned to the son, highlighting the courage it took to stand up respectfully for someone you love. He explained that this kind of bravery, though not always publicized or rewarded, was the foundation of leadership and character. The father and son listened intently, absorbing every word, feeling a profound mix of pride, humility, and gratitude. A small crowd had gathered by now, curious and inspired by the presence of the four-star general. The general spoke to them as well, sharing stories of his career and emphasizing the value of small, everyday acts of courage. He made it clear that heroism is not always measured in medals or accolades, but often in the choices a person makes when no one is watching. The father reflected silently, realizing that the moment at the gas station was a real-life example of this principle. The son, meanwhile, felt a deep sense of accomplishment and understanding, seeing that his actions had meaning far beyond his immediate perception. The general asked the son to share his perspective on what had happened. The son spoke honestly, recounting the tension he had felt, the surge of responsibility, and the realization that standing up for his father was not about anger, but about respect. He described the careful balance of firmness and politeness that he had tried to maintain, and how he had drawn strength from his father's calm presence. The father added his reflections, speaking about the lessons of courage, integrity, and the quiet power of standing up for others. The general nodded, visibly impressed, noting that both father and son had demonstrated qualities that could inspire an entire community. He then suggested they take a few moments for a photograph, which would later serve as a symbol of courage, respect, and family values. The father, modest as always, agreed quietly, while the son smiled, understanding the importance of capturing this moment. The crowd, though small, witnessed the scene with admiration. Some whispered about the rarity of such encounters, where ordinary people and someone of great rank came together to celebrate simple yet powerful acts of human integrity. After the photo, the general spoke more personally to the father and son. He shared insights about leadership, explaining that true leaders are not defined solely by rank or title, but by how they inspire, protect, and respect those around them. He highlighted that the son's actions at the gas station reflected the values of respect, courage, and responsibility, qualities that he had spent a lifetime seeking and teaching. The father felt a deep sense of pride, knowing that his son had internalized the lessons he had tried to impart through stories and example. The son felt inspired, understanding that his small act of standing up for his father was part of a larger narrative of integrity and human goodness. The general emphasized that these values were essential not just in military life but in everyday living. He spoke about the importance of acting with integrity in schools, workplaces, and communities, and how one act of courage could inspire countless others. The father and son reflected on this, realizing that their small confrontation had already begun to ripple outwards, touching lives they might never meet. The general's words were not just commendation but guidance, highlighting the impact of principled behavior and the significance of setting examples for others. Before leaving, the general offered some parting advice, stressing that courage and respect are habits formed through consistent choices. He encouraged the son to continue observing, learning, and acting with integrity, assuring the father that he had done a remarkable job raising a thoughtful, courageous young man. The father expressed his gratitude, acknowledging that the recognition from someone of such experience and rank was both humbling and inspiring. The son felt a deep sense of motivation, understanding that real-life courage comes in many forms, both quiet and visible. As the general departed, the father and son remained for a moment, watching him walk away. They felt a renewed connection, not only to each other but to the broader values of integrity, respect, and courage that the general had reinforced. The son realized that the morning's experience had given him a clearer understanding of his own character and the type of person he wanted to become. The father felt a profound sense of satisfaction, seeing his son internalize lessons he had lived by for decades. They finished their coffee in reflective silence, the hum of the gas station providing a gentle backdrop. The father spoke softly about the importance of remembering the lessons learned, not just in moments of recognition, but in everyday life. The son nodded, absorbing the wisdom and feeling inspired to carry these lessons into his school, friendships, and future challenges. The day, which began like any other, had become a defining moment in their lives, weaving together courage, respect, and family bonds in a way that would stay with them forever. As they left the station and walked to their truck, the son looked at his father with admiration, realizing that courage and integrity were not abstract concepts but living, breathing parts of daily life. The father smiled, feeling a quiet pride in seeing his son embrace these principles naturally and confidently. They drove home slowly, the town around them waking fully unaware of the significance of the morning's events. Yet the father and son knew that what had happened was meaningful, a moment that would continue to influence them, shape their choices, and strengthen the bond between them. It was a reminder that standing up for what is right, with respect and courage, could resonate far beyond a single day or place, leaving a lasting impact on lives and hearts.